Hello, everybody, and welcome to another tier list on the story mode. It's going to be another Batman themed one. Today, we are talking about Batman movie villains. So, this will be featuring any character who, from the comics, is considered a Batman villain who have been in the films. So, there are some here who have actually not fought Batman. There are some here. There are a couple exceptions that were made for the films themselves, but for the most part, we're sticking to characters who were villains of Batman in the books and have been translated into the comics. So, into the films. So, I did not include something like Superman, if you want to call him a villain from Batman versus Superman. I did not include Lex Luthor because he's not a Batman villain technically; he's a Superman villain, unless he's fighting the Justice League, obviously. But yes, so we're going to focus on that. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel down below. If you haven't, comment below. Let us know what you thought of this tier list. And now to bring it in and let's begin, I want to explain the tiers. As usual, I do quotes for the tiers. So the S tier was I'm Gotham's Reckoning. It's Bane quote. I think that summarizes the S tier villains. Wait till they get a load of me from Batman 89, Jack Nicholson's Joker. Kick Ice villains. I stretched that quote a little bit, but that's Mr. Freeze from Batman and Robin. Don't burden yourself with the secrets of scary people. That's Carmine Falcone from Batman Begins. You flush it, I flaunt it. Penguin from Batman Returns. And don't talk like you're one of them. You're not. Joker from The Dark Knight. So those will be the tiers. So we've got S, A, B, C, D, and F tier here. So we're going to kick it off with, and I think it's in alphabetical order. Yes, it is. So Bane will be the first one from Batman and Robin. This is one of the absolute worst villain performances ever in any comic book movie. It's a terrible representation of Bane. When you look at comic book films, you can always look at them, especially when it's DC, you can look at them as Elseworlds tales, where if you haven't read comics, a lot of times they take Batman, like the first Elseworlds book, Batman Gotham by Gaslight, they take Batman and put him in the 1800s where he's fighting Jack the Ripper. But it's still like the essence of the character and who he is as a person is still there. And that's why he's identifiable with Batman. It's kind of the way I look at the characters in the films. It doesn't have to be a one-to-one translation of their whole backstory and all of that. But as long as it feels like the character, I think that's kind of the main thing I'm grading them on. So to move on to Bane from The Dark Knight Rises, who does feel quite different than the books, because the books, he's manipulative and cunning in the books, but he's also huge in brute strength with his venom, steroid enhancing powers and all that. Bane from The Dark Knight Rises is just a big guy. He doesn't have any powers. The mask pumps morphine into his mouth, so he's healed from his injuries. I think this is a great representation of Bane's mental abilities, the way he's able to psychologically outclass his opponents, the way he's able to plan and devise these really elaborate schemes. I think Tom Hardy's Bane is a great representation of all that. Obviously, it lacks a little bit of the physicality, but I think when you have a really grounded real world Batman and a really grounded real world Bane, it's a great compliment to Christian Bale's Batman. I think I'm going to put him in Wait Till They Get a Load of Me right now. I'd love to put him at the top. I really actually kind of want to, because I've always loved this character. I love doing the impression and stuff too. I like to only put 5 in the top tier, so that's going to be really tough. So this is Black Mask. It's hard to see Ewan McGregor's Black Mask from Birds of Prey, or the Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn. The title is absurd. Just like the movie. The movie's pretty average, I would say. It's a little under, like, it's slightly below average for me. I don't really like the movie that much, but it has some good scenes. Ewan McGregor is definitely a standout, though, and I do love Ewan McGregor. Admittedly, I am a very big Ewan McGregor fan. I'm a very big Obi-Wan fan. That's my favorite Star Wars character. So I appreciate what he did here and his performance. I think he captures Black Mask's insanity. I think he captures the way Black Mask kind of loses it and gets out of control at times, and that's always been kind of a staple of the Black Mask character versus like Carmine Falcone or Salvatore Marone or even Penguin when we're talking about mob bosses in Batman. I don't love that the mask itself is not like sealed to his face like it is in the books. I prefer that. I don't like that it's an actual mask. But I think his performance is pretty decent. I would say, I don't know if I'd put him in the top 3 tiers. I don't know if he quite kicks ice, but I'd say don't burden yourself with the secrets of scary people. The guy who says that line, Tom Wilkinson's Carmine Falcone, he's a good version of Carmine Falcone. He only really is in the first hour to hour and 10 minutes of the movie, and then after that, he's completely sidelined. So I think because he's really taken out of the fight, I'm gonna have to put him in that tier with his actual quote. Okay, so next up would be Carmine Falcone from the Batman. So it's one of the more recent additions. John Turturro's Carmine Falcone in the Batman is actually one of my favorite parts of the film. It's a super underrated character, and in my opinion, it's a character I've always wanted to see really well translated, and I think Batman gets very, very close. It does a great job of complementing this character, especially in the world that he's built in. I think it's one of the more underrated parts of the movie itself too. He's not in any of the marketing, which I found crazy because I thought he was going to be in like one scene of the movie because he's in nothing, but he's one of the main characters. And I thought John Turturro does a great job as playing Carmine Falcone. They call him Falcone in the movie. It's Falcone because it's Italian, but I'm gonna put him in Kick Ice. He's a pretty Kick Ice villain. Catwoman, Lee Meriwether's Catwoman. It's hard when you're grading these villains they're like from the 60s because this is a completely different era of comics than we are mostly all used to. It's a version that captures the version of Catwoman from the 60s very well, and the version of Catwoman that's existed since the 40s very well. But the version of Catwoman's a lot more complex nowadays. She's a lot more interesting than she is back in the 60s portrayal, but I think it's a very good version of that. I'd say I like it a bit more than Black Mask and Carmine Falcone from Batman Begins. I don't know if I quite like her enough to move her up to Kick Ice. I think she's just kind of standard. I find Riddler, Penguin, and Joker a little bit more entertaining in that film, at least. But she and half the movie she's pretending to be Miss Kitka, so she's not really Catwoman for most of the film. And we're only talking about the film. We're not talking about the TV show. So I'm going to leave her there for now. We might adjust. Michelle Pfeiffer is iconic as Catwoman, but she's probably out of, well, besides Halle Berry, the farthest removed from the books. Like her origin and her version of Catwoman doesn't really represent the books very well. I would say she nails the sensuality of Catwoman. She nails the physicality of Catwoman, the way she walks, the way she moves. The whip is well used in this, which the Anne Hathaway or Zoe Kravitz versions don't use the whip very often. The Zoe Kravitz one does use it, but it's only in like a couple scenes. I'd say there's so many great things about Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman, and I really do think it's the strongest performance in the film itself. Like, she outclasses Michael Keaton and she outclasses Danny DeVito in the film, and she is a little closer to the comic book versions than Danny DeVito is as the Penguin, but I don't know. I would say I'll put her in the front of Kick Ice right now because I think she's really, really great, but not, I don't know if she's like greatest of all time because she doesn't necessarily completely capture what I want from the comic books, I would say. But now looking at Halle Berry, we have another one in our bottom tier. I don't know what to say is worse because Bane is just an abysmal attempt at capturing the character in that film. But Halle Berry's version is the main character of a film, and it's awful. So I don't know what's worse, to truly try to capture a character and completely fail, or to not try at all to capture the character. Put it right there for now. Don't talk like you're one of them. You're not Catwoman. It was no. Anne Hathaway, who's a very underrated Catwoman, I think, in The Dark Knight Rises, she really nails the personality of Selena Kyle. I think like Zoe Kravitz to me might be a little bit of a step up, and I think she's gonna be cemented as the greatest Catwoman we've gotten as we get more and more Batman films from Matt Reeves. But Anne Hathaway's version is great, and I think it's a way better representation of Selena Kyle herself than Michelle Pfeiffer's. Michelle Pfeiffer, I think, has more screen time, and when she has the screen time, it's a lot flashier, and she gets those big moments. But Anne Hathaway is more of the comic book version, in my opinion, and I think I would put her right in front of Michelle Pfeiffer. I know that's going to upset some people, but I think she's a really kick-ass villain. If you're counting how many times I say that in this video, let me know down in the comments. But Zoe Kravitz, I'm going to slide her up into the A tier. Wait till they get a load of me, because I don't think we've got enough of her, and she is more of an anti-hero. than a villain. She really doesn't do anything villainous in this film, where like at least Anne Hathaway's Catwoman leads Batman to his conflict with Bane. She starts out the movie kind of as a villain and then transitions to anti-hero. Michelle Pfeiffer's is a complete villain the whole time. Zoe Kravitz is really more of a hero, so I even hesitated to put her on the list. But if we're talking about performance, we're talking about what I think is the potential is of this character, and the fact that we're probably going to have more than one movie of hers, which we've never had more than one movie for any of these other Catwomans. I think she's here. I just think because she's not a villain per se, I don't know if I can put her in front of Bane, who to me is one of the best Batman movie villains we've ever gotten. But I'm going to put her here because she really does nail the character. She looks just like the Catwoman in the last like 20 years from the books, the Ed Brubaker and Darwin Cook run, especially Tom King run recently. She looks great. And I think they really are going to do a great job with her in the future as well. Deadshot, who first appears in a Batman comic, if you guys didn't know, played by Will Smith. This is not, I think this is a pretty good version of Deadshot. It is a bit more Will Smithy than Deadshot should be. I think the mask is awesome. I wish he wore it more because I think the costume is really great. This is from the Suicide Squad, not the Suicide Squad, but I wanted more of him. We don't really get more of him. He is more of an anti-hero in the films than he like he is kind of in the Suicide Squad books versus when he's in the Batman books. But I think it's pretty good portrayal. I would say. I don't know if I put him in Kick Ice, but I put him probably right at the front of Don't Burden Yourself with the Secrets of Scary People. He's very good, and I wish we got to see more, but I think since Suicide Squad is such an awful movie, I'd put him right there for now. But Margot Robbie, who is also in Suicide Squad, but she's gotten her own Harley Quinn film, and she got to be in The Suicide Squad, which is a far better movie. She's absolutely perfect fan casting for Harley Quinn. I think like we all after seeing Wolf of Wall Street and hearing her accent and that and all of that, everybody wanted her to be Harley. She is Harley. She embodies Harley. She's a great Harley. I just wish she was in better movies. The Suicide Squad is a great start, but I want to see her in more. But I think if we're really talking about one-to-one translations of the comics, and this is one of the absolute best, it's one of the only things DC EU has really nailed the whole time. I think I'd put her in I'm Gotham's Reckoning. And I don't know, she's more of an anti-hero like she has been over the last like 7-8 years in the comics versus how she was in the Batman the Animated Series and originally in the comics. But I feel like Margot Robbie is just such a perfect representation of that character that I have a hard time not putting her in the top tier. And I'm only going to put 5 in the S tier, so that's a pretty big compliment. Cesar Romero as the Joker, maybe not the weakest Joker because obviously there's one that really stands out as the worst. But he like even being a bad Joker, I think there's one bad Joker, and everything else is fantastic. And Cesar Romero is a great version of the Joker, and it's kind of a testament to the character of the Joker that he hasn't changed all that much since 1940 when he first appeared in Batman #1. So Cesar Romero is a great version of him. He's probably the most comic book accurate, if you're not counting the animated ones, I would say, out of all these Jokers. I know he uses gadgets. He's kind of crazy. I think he's not as brutal or violent as he's become in the last like 40 years. He's still very much so goofy, but I think he really does a great job with his version of Joker. I don't know, like we're gonna have so many Jokers up at the top that I think like I'm gonna probably put him still and wait till they get a load of me because I think he's a great version of the Joker and he really nails it and I don't know he's got a little bit more physicality to him than some of these other Jokers do where it's more mind games. Jack Nicholson, I think if you're taking the personality of the Joker post like mid 1970s, Jack Nicholson is the absolute closest to me to the Joker from the comics in live action. I think there's times when he's a little Jack Nicholson-y. There's times when he says some lines that you go like, I don't know if that works. But then there's other lines when he like, uses the buzzer to burn that guy, the mob boss, and he goes, "Oh, I'm glad you did." Like, there's some really funny moments in here. Like the joke. That's one of the things we've gone into making the Joker so depressing and dark and focusing on the crazy that we forget about the fun. And yes, Joker, it should be terrifying, right? He should be, because he's a guy that just remorselessly goes after people, and he has no really sense of morals at all. But I think with the Joker, one of the reasons why that he's so scary is because he has fun doing everything he's doing. I think Heath Ledger captures that, but Jack Nicholson captures it the best out of anyone. I'm going to put him in Gotham's Reckoning because he really is fantastic as the Joker, and he looks so much like the comic book version. The next one is, in my opinion, the best version of the Joker, and obviously it's a little easier to do because it's animated, but Mark Hamill's Joker, Mark Hamill's voice is the Joker. Even if we're just talking Mask and the Phantasm, it's perfect. There's literally nothing to say. He's the best version of the character, in my opinion, as a comic book person. I think he just absolutely captures every single aspect of the character. To me, he's the top of Gotham's Reckoning, which is filling up fast. And because I think we all know this one is going to be up there too. Heath Ledger's version of the Joker nails the Agent of Chaos is the perfect descriptor for him. He gets it. He's funny. He has just, there's so much to this character, and the performance itself is so unhinged. I love everything about it. I think where I see Jax is a little bit more in line with the books. I think Ledger brought something new that's really imprinted on Joker into the books now, because everybody's loved Ledger so much. That side of Ledger's Joker has become part of the books now. He's probably the most influential performance in comic book movie history. Obviously, he's one of two that's won an Oscar. But I think it's just, and he's just so good. There's not much more I can say about it. You know, he's going to be up in the S tier. Okay, here we go. Jared Leto. I appreciate some of the things he tried to do, right? Like, I appreciate the mob boss side of Joker, which nobody's done, because there are plenty of comics and there are plenty of stories where Joker has his own gang and his own clubs, and like he's actually like doing stuff. I mean, even at Death in the Family, he's like a political influencer. It's just, I really despise the look of this version of the Joker. Not necessarily the performance, but the look, the costuming, the tattoos, everything is just so off for me. It's does not work. He's a good actor, and he's far better than Halle Berry and Catwoman, and far better than Bane. So I'm going to put it in, you flush it, I flaunt it. I think we could flush that performance down the toilet and forget about it, but for some reason they keep seeing Hellbent on bringing him back. So I don't know. Zach Galifianakis' Joker from Lego Batman movie is actually a very underrated version of the character. I think it understands, even if it's at a heightened comedic level, it understands the Batman-Joker relationship very well. And I think it's a pretty darn good performance. It's also still animated, but I think that's why I'm going to give Cesar Romero a bit more of the edge between the two. But I think it's a great version of Joker, and I think it captures the comics quite well. So I'm putting him there. Joaquin Phoenix. So Joaquin Phoenix is a really tough one, because even though Heath Ledger plays like a more real-world psychopath version of the Joker, Joaquin Phoenix really dives into like the origin of how would a person become the Joker, and how do they become the Joker, because we never really seen that in movies before. And I think the movie's great. I genuinely think the movie's great. And I think Joaquin Phoenix gives a great performance for what the Joker is in that film. But if I'm comparing him with other Jokers, I think for the performance alone, I'm going to put him ahead of Romero and of Galifianakis, just because it is an Oscar-winning performance. He's really great in the movie. The movie is haunting and disturbing. It lacks the comedy side of Joker, which like I think Joker needs to have a bit more, and his personality, it's more cynical. But since the film is so great, and since he won an Oscar for it, I'm going to put him here. It's also like, it's hard for me to put him up here because we've never seen him play off of Batman, which is such an integral part of being the Joker. But the performance itself is so good. I'm put him right behind Zoe Kravitz, who I think will become the seminal Catwoman, and Bane, who I really want to move up here, but I'm gonna see who else is left. So if you don't know this is the only character I'm including from Batman versus Superman, because as I said, Lex Luthor, I don't consider him really a Batman villain, and Superman, the whole conflict between them doesn't really make much sense. So I was not going to put him as a villain in here. And we don't see enough of the nightmare stuff to really put him as a villain. where I feel comfortable rating him. But this is the KG Beast, who's in a Batman story, actually. He's a Batman villain. It's not a very good version of the KG Beast. He doesn't really do anything or say anything. So I'm going to put him here. Very forgettable, but most people don't know that that's actually a Batman villain. A Killer Croc from Suicide Squad, who I don't love. I know that the film won Best Makeup. I really don't love the look of Killer Croc, if I'm being honest in this. I think it's a decent portrayal of the character, but obviously we don't get to really see him unhinged. It's a bit more too real world look for me. Like I would prefer a gigantic CGI crocodile like we got with King Shark in the Suicide Squad. It's okay. I think I would also put it down here though, and you flush it, I flaunt it. It's not my favorite. I'm just including every other villain from the Lego Batman movie. So Harley Quinn was standout for me. Billy D. Williams Two-Face is a standout for me. Bane is a standout for me. There's a lot of fun villains in this. I love that they give screen time to Polka-Dot Man and all those types of characters. Penny Plunderer, Condiment King. Is Condiment King in this? I hope he is. I can't remember, but I'm just lumping them all together, and I think I'm going to put him in probably this tier. None of that, like Joker definitely leaves the most impression on you. They're all fun though. They're all good representations, like heightened parody representations of the versions from the comics. It's just there's just too many of them to put them all on the list, so I'm gonna lump them all in there. Max Schreck from Batman Returns is a villain that's not in the books, but is one of the main villains of the film. I've never loved this villain, if I'm being honest. I think I'm gonna put it in. You flush it, I flaunt it. Christopher Walken is a Tim Burton character in this movie, that's for sure. But I don't know. He's not. Whenever you go with businessman villain, usually it doesn't work. Lex Luthor is the only one that's really beloved, and I think they've yet to really nail Lex Luthor in movies too. So, Mr. Freeze, Arnold Schwarzenegger's Mr. Freeze. It's a bad representation of the character for sure. But I think it's like the most fun and entertaining villain in that movie. I think I would actually put him above most of these characters. I think I like him more than these. Yes, the movie's absurd, and he's like extremely goofy and absurd in the movie. It's not a good representation of Mr. Freeze, who has so many layers to him and is such a great villain, and a villain that you can easily identify with and understand where he's coming from. But it's not a good version, but it actually is, like, from a campy perspective, a lot more fun, and I think he does nail what he's going for, at least. And if you're looking at Mr. Freeze from like the 60s version, you can kind of see a bit more of a parallel there than Mr. Freeze. I think it gets a lot of criticism as well because it came out right after we're doing Mr. Freeze in Batman the Animated Series, when we completely revolutionized his origin. So I'm putting him there. Mr. Zsasz in Batman Begins got a couple of menacing shots, but he doesn't really do anything. I have to put him down here as well. Probably put him ahead of Jared Leto. But yeah, it doesn't really do anything. But Mr. Zsasz in Birds of Prey is actually pretty cool. I think they did a pretty good job with him. Obviously, I think he should be a little bit more distant, a little less talkative, a little less. But I think they do a good job with making him menacing. So I'll put him in that middle tier. Burgess Meredith's Penguin. Burgess Meredith's Penguin is one of my favorite parts of those movies. He's just so much fun. I think he's like really nails the Penguin, that like basically the version of the Penguin we've had up until like the mid 90s, maybe early 2000s. Like, he's just a fun, kooky villain. I really want to put him high up on this list, but I'm probably going to put him there for now. I think he's a pretty kick-ass villain. But Danny DeVito's version, I think Danny DeVito does a great job nailing the version he's going for. Unfortunately for me, I don't really like this version of the Penguin that much. I don't know. I don't love the like Tim Burton creature feature type of look at this character. It has nothing really in line with the comic book version at all, other than the way he looks. And I guess if you're going off the way he looks pretty close to the Penguin in the books. But other than that, there's nothing really that I love about this villain. I know I don't like Batman Returns as much as most people do. I think it's a fun, decent movie, but I don't think it's great. I think he has more impact than some of these other villains, so I'll probably put him here. But I don't think it's a great villain. Like, I know a lot of people would have him up in one of the top 2 or 3 tiers, and for me, I'll put him in the C tier. I think he's just all right. But the Penguin from the Batman, I think, is a great version of the Penguin, the best version of the Penguin we've gotten so far. I'm actually going to put him right. Joaquin Phoenix performance is great, but I think as Batman villain, this version of the Penguin is the best we've gotten, and I think I cannot wait to see what they do with him, both in the Penguin show that we're getting. We're also getting an Arkham Asylum show. I hope they connect, and in future Batman movies. I think Colin Farrell completely nails the Penguin, and the makeup is so good. Like, they do a fantastic job with the Penguin in this. The Phantasm, another character created for the film. If you know the twist, I think this is one of the better, more developed villains. I think the look of it is also very cool. It's really more about who's underneath the costume that makes this villain so powerful for me. And I love the film and the way it all connects. I don't know, but it's not. I would not say the Phantasm leaves a mark as well as some of these other characters. But it is, the villain is so integral to the point of the film and the plot of the film. I probably put the Phantasm right there for Wait Till They Get a Load of Me. Some people might find that high, but I think the Phantasm, that film is so great, and that character is really solid in it. Poison Ivy, oh my God, really another awful representation of this character. I think I'll put Poison Ivy, and don't talk like you're one of them. You're not. It's not a good version of Poison Ivy. I really don't like it at all, if I'm being honest. So yeah, bottom tier. Polka-Dot Man from the Suicide Squad. I have the first appearance of Polka-Dot Man comic book, so I've always liked this character. I think it's a pretty good representation of the character. Obviously, the personalities and stuff are quite different, but I mean, they do a good job of trying to make Polka-Dot Man like you feel for him, you're compassionate for him. He's got some empathetic moments. I don't know. I like this version. I'm gonna put him in Kick Ice. I really think he kicks ice. He's a fun villain. He's good. I like him in the Suicide Squad. Liam Neeson's Ra's al Ghul, or Ra's al Ghul, depending on what you want to say. They say Ra's in the film. I think this is a really good version of Ra's al Ghul. Not like there can be, if someone came out and did the Ra's al Ghul from the comics a little bit closer, you can have a version that's significantly better than Liam Neeson's version. But I think he gets the physicality down, the sword fighting, all of that is really cool. His plot, I think, works quite well. The philosophies are there from Ra's al Ghul and the League of Shadows, and in the books it's the League of Assassins. I think they do a pretty good job getting this character down. Don't know if it's top tier or like second tier. I would say I'd put him right after Anne Hathaway's Catwoman. I think that's a pretty fair placement. I think he's like very good, and I don't know if he in particular makes Batman Begins better. Like, Batman is the best part of Batman Begins. Batman, Alfred, that side of it. But I think he's a good villain, and he's not in the film as much as you would probably want from your main villain. Those would be my biggest criticisms, but I think, again, really good. The Riddler, Frank Gorshin's Riddler. I think Frank Gorshin's Riddler is a little more underwhelming than Joker and Penguin are in Batman 66, kind of around the Catwoman tier. So that's why I think I'm going to put him here. But I think it's a very, very great representation of the Riddler from the comics, especially at that time. And I think it's probably the most comic accurate one we still have. So the Riddler, Jim Carrey's version, I know some people like this. To me, I don't like this version of the Riddler at all. I think it's pretty bad, if I'm being honest. It's just absurd and goofy, and I know Jim Carrey, it's a Jim Carrey performance, and I like Jim Carrey in some things. I prefer his dramas, obviously, to his comedy. But yeah, I don't know. I've never really liked this version, and especially rewatching Batman Forever recently. It was not for me. I'm going to put him in the bottom tier, to be honest. I don't like it. The Riddler from the Batman. So I think this is an interesting version of the Riddler. Definitely a more realistic, real world version, a crazier version, a brutal version. I think it rides the line between like the more brutal version we've seen in the Arkham video games and the versions that are more fun and entertaining from like 60s, 70s, 80s comics and the animated series. I think it does a pretty good job of it goes a little bit further than the Arkham version is, so like it doesn't really have any of the fun that Riddler has. And they did miss an opportunity to put the ballpoint banana riddle in this film from Batman 66. But I think in the context of the film, as a villain for the film, I think this villain works really, really well. And like, it's completely shocking to me that I'm going to put all three villains from the Batman up here. I think I still like Penguin and Catwoman a little bit more, but I think the Riddler works really, really well. I think it's a great performance. It's a great villain. I can't wait to see what they do with him in the future, and maybe they'll make him more like the comic books in the future. Salvatore Maroni from The Dark Knight, played by Eric Roberts. I think this version of Sal Maroni is pretty good. We get more to him than Carmine, so I think I would put him higher than Carmine. I don't know if I put him that high though, because obviously he's not the main villain, but I think he is effective in the scenes. I think physically, like some of the facial expressions he does, some of the looks, I really buy Eric Roberts as a mob boss. Like he looks really good. I wish he kind of got more screen time, but obviously it's taken up by Joker and all that plot and Two-Face. So I think I'll put him right in front of Carmine Falcone because he's Maroni, even though Falcone is better than Maroni in the books, like more iconic and a better character usually. Maroni, I think, outclasses him in the Dark Knight trilogy. So Cillian Murphy's Scarecrow. This is a tough one because I think he's great. Like I think he's really great. They could have gone a lot deeper. They could have really used Scarecrow's fear toxin and what Scarecrow represents as a character, as someone who you dive into your greatest fears with the character. They could have done a lot with that in comparison with Bruce, especially as an origin story. But so I think he's underwhelmingly used, but every scene he's in, he's one of the best parts. I particularly love that scene where Batman's investigating that apartment and he first sprays Batman with the fear toxin, and you see Batman starting to see the bats coming off his mask. I think Nolan does a great job with the visuals on Scarecrow's mask. And when he has that line, he goes, "You know what I think? I think you need to lighten up." And he throws the gasoline on him and then drops I think it's vodka. He throws vodka on him and drops the lighter. It's a really good scene. I think it's kind of an underrated villain, honestly, because there's so many great villains in the Nolan series. I want to put him, I think I'll put him right here in front of Burgess Meredith's Penguin. I think he's a really good version. I think we just could have gone a little bit deeper with the psychology and all that type of stuff. He's kind of an afterthought. I think Batman Begins, that's one of the bigger flaws in the villain structure, is it's like mob, Falcone, or we have like an introduction to Ra's al Ghul, but not really meant to be a villain at that point. And then we have mob, Falcone stuff. Then we move on to Scarecrow, and then we move on back to Ra's al Ghul, and they don't really all connect as well as they could have. Talia. So Talia is a kind of a controversial one. I don't necessarily love the way they used it. I think it was kind of one of those characters that we all kind of guessed the twist, or at least for me, I was following the Dark Knight Rises news so closely that basically everybody was saying, yeah, Marion Cotillard's going to be playing Talia al Ghul. So it was not a shock when she reveals it. And in that sense, Talia's really she's only Talia for like the last 20 minutes of the movie. Other than that, she's Miranda Tate. And as Miranda Tate, she's a completely different character. So I don't know if it's necessary. We can necessarily rank her as Talia. I think I don't know. I think I'd probably put her at the bottom of that tier, of the, what is it, C tier. Don't burden yourself with the secrets of scary people. I think she could have been a lot better. I think the twist kind of takes a little bit of focus away from Bane, which is, kind of he's a lot stronger in the film than Talia, so they could have picked one or the other, but they tried to tie it in with Batman Begins a little bit too much for me, I think, at points. And she doesn't necessarily really leave an impact. You leave the movie thinking about Bane the whole time, so put her there. Tommy Lee Jones's Two-Face is another one that I think is absolutely just a terrible representation of the character and completely goofy. I'm not a fan. I think like Batman Forever to me is ruined by the villains. Like it's a decent movie. I think I mentioned it before. The aesthetics between the Burton and Schumacher aesthetics, they clash so hard, and it does not really work visually for me. But on top of that, you also have like the Burton that like he's trying to go Burton with some of the Riddler stuff and with some of the Two-Face stuff, but then also the goofy, like homage to the 60s that Schumacher's going with doesn't work. And like Tommy Lee Jones is just absurd in this movie. He's trying to like outclass Jim Carrey. He's like trying to out Jim Carrey, and they just have so many ridiculous moments. I think like it's an okay movie until you, but every scene you get the villains, it truly is like I truly don't like that movie every time the villains are on screen. When you see Val Kilmer as Batman, it's actually pretty good. And so finally, we're going with Aaron Eckhart's Two-Face, which I think is really, everybody talks about the Joker from The Dark Knight, but Aaron Eckhart's Two-Face is arguably just as good. It's such a great representation of the Two-Face story, the rise and fall of Harvey Dent, all of that stuff, what makes Harvey Dent, and what makes Two-Face, Two-Face. I think where it could be, improved would have been if we would have gotten a sequel with him. We would have gotten to see a bit more of the duality in the Two-Face character itself. That would have been better, but I think emotionally and performance-wise, this is one of the best versions of Harvey Dent that we've ever seen. It is the best version of Harvey Dent we've seen in film, and the best version of Two-Face we've seen in film. I'm absolutely going to put him up here. I think he's a fantastic villain, and that means that I've got to move one of these up to the S tier because I think for me, that's going to be Bane. I absolutely love Bane. I think they did a great job with Bane. I think they really did. So I'm going to put Bane up there. Those are my villain rankings. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you haven't yet, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for more tier lists in the future. I'll be doing a lot more Batman content. I think we'll be doing one about the comics next too. So stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.